So, while it can be practiced in a number of ways, good collaborative leadership is almost always characterized by three specific ideas. These ideas illustrate why it's important, even critical, to integrate some collaborative techniques into other leadership styles. Here are the three ideas. Collaborative problem solving and decision making. It is not the leader's job to decide what to do and then tell the group about it. Rather, the group considers the problem, decides what to do, and then counts on the leader to help them focus their effort. Open process. The leader, or some other interested party, like Putnam's mayor, doesn't just start with his or her goals in mind and steer the group in that direction. Collaborative leadership means that the process of decision-making is truly collaborative and has no set end point when it actually starts. The end result is worked out among all the participants. That's collaboration. Leadership of the process rather than the group. The purpose of collaborative leadership is to help the collaborative process work rather than to lead the people involved towards something, to a particular decision, for instance, or in a particular direction. A great way to illustrate these three ideas comes straight from a headline story that affected millions of people in 2014. I bet many of you in the audience were affected by it too. I'm talking about the Target data breach story. You may recall, in the aftermath of the data breach, Target's management came under intense scrutiny, and sales and profits fell dramatically in the short term. The relentless negative media coverage certainly didn't help, and Chairman Greg Steinhoffel resigned his position. Soon after, Target named Brian Cornell, a former PepsiCo executive, to take the place of Steinhoffel. Brian Cornell faces some pretty big challenges as the new CEO, but he made news in August as he came on board by announcing he would make no immediate changes. Instead, he called himself a newcomer and a student. Minneapolis's largest newspaper ran a headline in the business section that read, "New CEO to be a student," and the article highlighted many business insiders who hailed it as a really wise move on the part of the new CEO. Upon Cornell's arrival in Minneapolis, the city in which Target is headquartered, he of course did the expected. He sat for the photo ops, headed up a news conference for the shareholders and the media, and met with company insiders and some of the staff. But he did something unexpected, too. This was perhaps one of his wisest moves. He spent some unscheduled time touring the downtown Minneapolis urban flagship store. As an urban store, that Target is decidedly different from the big box stores we're used to seeing in suburbs all across America. The store manager accompanied Cornell in his tour, during which Cornell reiterated his immediate role as that of a student. He said he's looking for ideas and input from a wide range of people, from the individual store managers to those who work all the way up the corporate hierarchy. Target has a lot of work to do as it recovers from the data breach and other losses, and one new CEO, as astute as he may be, is going to need a lot of help. Of course, a major corporate identity like Target is not likely to readily adopt a collaborative leadership culture across the board. But there are a lot of reasons why some techniques of collaborative leaders could be used very effectively in otherwise traditional leadership companies. The Target story is a big business example. Now let's look at just the opposite, a small business example. I'd like to share a very personal story to illustrate this idea of collaborative leadership. Those of you who have met me before, either in one of my live seminars or in an online webinar like this one, may be familiar with part of this story. I left my longtime career as a Minnesota television news anchorwoman following the death of my first husband. It wasn't an easy choice for me at the time, as you can imagine, but his death necessitated that I leave my job to take over the ownership and the management of a business that he had started and run for many years. It was a blue-collar business, a male-dominated blue-collar business at that. Before I go on, consider this. Do you suppose that his workers were excited about me taking over? Do you suppose that there was some real resistance along the lines of, if she thinks she's going to tell me what to do, she's got another thing coming? How much credibility do you think they think I had to take over as their boss? Initially, I can tell you it was pretty darn close to zero. Of course they knew me, but they didn't know me as their boss. However, their first and foremost concern certainly wasn't me. What was it? It was the security of their jobs and the likelihood of receiving their next paycheck. I needed to get some respect from them, and I needed to do it fast. I can't take all the credit for all that I'm about to tell you, because I was lucky enough to have a friend and a mentor in the person of my late husband's uncle. He was a pretty astute businessman himself, and he gave me the following advice. He counseled me to approach the situation with caution. It's advice I share today with many younger people moving up the ranks of management, especially when they're supervising older and established workers with many years of tenure. He told me to humble myself, ask a lot of questions, and listen carefully to the answers. In other words, he told me to act like the new Target CEO and be the newcomer I was, instead of coming in and throwing my weight around trying to act like a boss. A couple of days after the funeral, I brought in a pile of pizzas into my first meeting with the entire staff. It was an emotional session, as you can probably guess. We laughed, we cried, we told stories, and then we got down to business. I told them that their jobs and paychecks were still intact and that the business would continue to operate as usual, at least for the time being. My thought process at the time, although I didn't completely verbalize it with the team, was that I had to at least figure out what the business was all about before I made any decisions about its future or my future. I asked them if they each would be willing to teach me how to do their jobs. I assured them I had no intention of taking over their jobs, but that I needed to figure out how each individual's job fit into the overall picture of what we were trying to accomplish. I figured a really good place to start would be the payroll department. So the very next week, that's where I started, with the person in charge of payroll. She showed me the personnel files and how to run the printer. Some of you may remember the printers with sprockets for loading paper correctly. I may be dating myself, but that's what we were using at the time. I like to think I'm reasonably intelligent, and I was a pretty quick study in running the programs. So in our downtime, in the process of learning all the functions, I began to get to know the payroll person a little better. It started with asking her lots of questions, like how she got into the business, whether this was something she wanted to do. I asked her what she liked about her job, what she didn't like. I asked her what she thought the business did well, and what we didn't do so well. I asked for her ideas and opinions. Over the course of the next 12 weeks, I worked through every single job in that company, in the office and in sales, and even a couple of grubby jobs in the warehouse. And I continued to do so, pitching in to help wherever I could. I talked to clients, answered the phone, learned to process orders, spent time in accounts receivable and accounts payable. Yep, I even cleaned the bathrooms, many, many times. In the process, I spent personal time with each employee and asked multiple versions of the same questions I asked the payroll person. I even asked each employee what I referred to as the $64 question. What would you do if you were in my shoes? I got lots of thoughtful answers to that one, and a few surprising ones, too. One of the warehouse workers answered the question by exclaiming, "I'd take the money and run, lady." The results of this little 12-week experiment really took me by surprise. What do you suppose happened? It felt like the employees had circled their wagons around me, that they had drawn in to protect me. Why? Why did they do that? Well, we reap what we sow. I treated them with kindness, respect, and dignity, and in return I got it back in spades. Their opinion about me and my role in the company had clearly changed. They knew I had their backs, and they knew I was interested in keeping them employed. Now think once again about those 3 keys I mentioned for good collaborative leadership and how they fit into this situation. This is why collaboration is advisable, even critical for all leadership styles, even if you currently work in a traditional hierarchy. Collaborative problem solving and decision making. In the beginning, I got feedback from the group right from the very start. They considered the problem right along with me, helped me decide what to do, and counted on me to help them focus their effort. Open process. I didn't start with my goals in mind to steer them in that direction. I hadn't even given much thought to my goals. For me at the time, I was concerned more about day-to-day survival after such a huge loss. The decision-making process about how to handle some of the issues was truly collaborative, and I can't tell you how many times I put the phone on hold to ask one of the employees for help or direction. The end result was worked out among all of us. Leadership of the process rather than the group. My purpose was not to lead people to a particular destination, but to help them think through the process. I didn't even have a final destination in mind at the time. All I knew at the time is that it would have been a really dumb move on my part to lock the door and walk away from a profitable business. Incidentally, if you find yourself wanting to know how the story ends, I'll tell you before we wrap up today.